This is probably going to be considered a worthless video, but I wanted to bring up something. On a website called mindmatters.ai, which, if you can't tell from that last thing, that's supposed to be a top-level domain for some country or something, but the website seems obsessed with the concept of artificial intelligence or us living in, fake realities or whatever. But anyway, there was a point in history, 1900 in Paris. David Hilbert and many other people posed a lot of questions that needed to be answered about the very nature of reality. One of the most important ones I thought of was something really silly sounding. Can you actually prove that under all conditions, under absolutely the most rigorous and therefore meaningless circumstances, can you really prove 1 plus 1 equals 2? That's not one of those, but that was one of many like this, where you had to really say, well, we know everything about it. We're at the ass end of learning, our basic ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. But can you really prove that the number 1 signifying any value for something like 1 cubic foot of air is obviously trillions of atoms or whatever, and another one, can you really prove with reasonable precision or fully hardcore precision that when you add them together, that will literally equal double the quantity? That seems like a really obvious thing, but when you hear it that way, you realize that is kind of a tall order, because you'd have to then look for what we count as 1 plus 1. A random, like 5 rocks can all have different masses, but the quantity doesn't change, right? Then you get into the fuzzy calculations, like air. Air doesn't have to stay where you put it. What if you get to a very high precision 1 ounce of water and another ounce of water and mix them together? That seems likely, but here's the rub. You could have a combination of water, it's not really H2O at this point, that could react to itself and somehow make a larger amount of mass by pulling something in from the outer environment or releasing itself as a gas because it's had a reaction, because it's not really just water, it has some trace elements in it, for instance. This is not really hard to realize when you can get a container of soda pop. So 2 quantities of what appear to be identical materials, you may have that reaction. But what if they are absolutely identical materials? Well, if you take 2 critical masses of uranium and put them together, they're eventually going to change mass. But getting rid of all these special cases, by the way, the uranium one is not really a special case, that's very important. Can you prove this mathematically by not touching anything? This is the observer paradox kind of concept. Can you really prove in an objective, omnipotent way that 1 plus 1 equals 2 using mathematics? Now you're getting into the whole point of what a real hard proof is in mathematics. We're not even doing calculus proofs, which some of you may be aware of. You're literally trying to find out, not can you prove this, but can you find any combination in math only where 1 plus 1 doesn't have to equal 2? And obviously you should be able to do that. I mean, I'm obviously opening it up to some crazy shit, but there is a mathematical proof that was created because the challenge was accepted and people went through and said, again, we can't find anything wrong with this proof, but it really does make it very, very likely that mathematics has a very good basis. Proving the existence of 0 is also another challenge at one point. So this one is pretty simple here. The axioms so set up are at the same time the definitions of those elementary ideas we use. No statement within the realm of science whose foundation we are testing is held to be correct unless it can be derived from those axioms by means of a finite number of logical steps. As we investigate and engage in investigation in the foundations of science, we have to set up a system of axioms, an exact and complete description of the relations subsisting between these ideas and science. And then the most important one the person presents, which, if you're not aware of it, is a gotcha, aha, take that science, checkmate. The most important thing we have to do is, of the numerous questions which can be asked with regard to axioms, prove that they are not contradictory axioms. A finite number of logical steps based upon them can never lead to contradictory results. That sounds like, depending on your bent, that sounds perfectly acceptable. And what I'm going to say is going to sound like the escape hatching because science and math are fake. Read your Bible or something to some people. It's based on this kind of dichotomy that you could have axioms that are completely realistic but not have them contradict each other. All right? But an axiom is an example of an axiom is every time you double all dimensions of a physical object, making it twice as tall, wide, or deep, it increases in volume that it takes up by 8. So you get 8 times the volume. And if you increase it that size and have its mass proportionally change, it's not doubling or quadrupling, it's octupling. This is the square cubed rule because you're cubing the value of this. And that is correct. And that's an axiom that cannot be contradictory. But there's a couple of cases where it is. Because they're based on something that has a finite limit to it and can't actually increase in mass. It just takes up more space. If you take 1 cubic millimeter of gunpowder propellant, you can make it take up literally by converting itself into a gas or vapor or a mixture of gas, vapor, and some solid material, depending on how efficient the expansion is. It will take up 8 times the space or less. It won't work out exactly right. And it could also take up more than 8 times the space because it might produce reactions that cause chemicals that have the habit at room temperature, once it finally cools down, of taking up more space than normal because they've been liberated from a physical limit. You could also have it to where they recondense because it produces mostly a thermal flashover effect, and they condense back down to something that's not really much different in size. All of the resulting precipitates and solutions, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the precipitate, might end up just being liquids. Liquids and solids, even through conversion, usually take up the same amount of volume. It's an axiom, rule of thumb, but it has a contradictory result. But what about diametrically opposed results, where you're supposed to get a positive and negative and they cancel each other out? Yeah, again with axioms. You can make sound and radio signals cancel each other out. It's almost impossible to do in the real world with normal chaos, which I'm going to get to in a minute, but you can make a contradictory result. One waveform plus one waveform equals no waveform because they canceled each other out. These aren't me ignoring anything here. This is examples of if you create axioms at the beginning stages and not believe they're going to contradict each other, you're an idiot. Because unless you know everything about reality and all the possible combinations, you don't have a basis for making axioms anymore. We make a set of axioms and correct them when they're wrong. But no, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater and not try. You see, that's the throw my hands up, I give up thing that I see in the comment sections and by a lot of woo peddlers. The person who sent me the link to this is not being a woo peddler or being an idiot here. What we're dealing with here are websites that creepy the idea in. Now, the website I'm talking about here is not a bad website, but a finite number of logical steps based upon axioms can never lead to contradictory results. Is an axiom. It's a false axiom. The person started off in the year 1900, with a false axiom. That means that axiom in and of itself is contradictory to all other axioms and reality and results. Some of these people, not this person necessarily, this individual in France, didn't like experiments because they didn't prop up their belief systems. It ought to work a certain way. I'm a philosophical and spiritual person. I don't give a shit. The engine isn't starting because our detonatable material has a bad vapor pressure rating. Did you know tungsten has a vapor pressure rating? But anyway, seriously, there's physics on this stuff. But anyway, the point I'm making here is When reality contradicts your belief, it's not an axiom. Or your assumption, it's not an axiom anymore. Okay? But this in and of itself is a person declaring an axiom as an important question that must be answered. But it has to be answered with this presumption that they can't be contradictory, because at our baby steps, we can't trip and fall. And the first thing that comes out of certain people's minds and hearts and souls, which I don't give a shit about when they speak it, when they speaketh the shit post. If science can't give me a perfect result, all science is bad. No. Just like you saying something stupid when you're 20 on the internet shouldn't prevent me from treating you like a human being when you're 50 and need to be resuscitated. Oh, I recognize you. You were in the comment section on YouTube. Fuck you. That's not going to happen. I don't carry those kind of axioms. Absolutism is very valuable in some ways. Science is very useful in most ways. And the assertion, we should be able to figure out the entire universe with science. Well, that's setting yourself up for bullshit. And no scientist that was ever really considered sane ever said that. Oh, we always understand the universe. No, we don't. We don't have omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent capability. No one does, not even a god. Because gods, in every write-up about them, say that they were caught off guard about something. Us. We surprise the gods. That's not possible. It is if they're not really omnipotent, omnipresent, omnipotent, impotentators. Or maybe just spuds. We are composed of chaos. And chaos is beyond the understanding of a god. So it's represented by the devil. Isn't that interesting? But chaos is the reason everything doesn't go into a very predictable pattern that you could never have an influence on. Chaos is the reason that the weather isn't 100% predictable 10 years ahead of time and always has that same hurricane hit exactly at 4 p.m. on October 4th. GMT. So, do you want to live in a universe that has predictable reality that you could map out in a game engine? I don't care if it's 32-bit. That's way too precise for the shit we really find. Science is no longer based on these literally 120-year-old axioms that were never right in the first place. None of the axioms should contradict each other. Otherwise what? They're just wrong and we need to keep learning until we fix them? Or throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, I'm going to repeat something here that I hope I explained in the beginning. This is primarily about David Hilbert, who died in 1943, before the nuclear warheads were detonated. And it's not his fault that he was wrong about this. But he was wrong if he actually believed that. I don't know if he did. I'd have to read all his writings. I've gone through his work and a dozen other people about the same thing years ago when I did a video about this very similarly. That's why I'm not showing any real notes in front of me at this point. I'm just looking at an email request. Or more actually just, hey, this is neat, look at it. I should also point out that the same page, same website, also points to a page about how we probably developed language and intelligence because we were trying to remember things and just started telling each other stories as a way to remind each other of things. And it ended up causing us to be very communicative and to have intelligence. But then again, the title of this is Faith is the Most Fundamental of Mathematical Tools. Because it gets to the same point. We have to have faith that we're right about things. I don't. I'm not really representing the article. I want you to read it. Because obviously, I'm just thumbnailing this like a... I'm being Wikipedia over here. We all know how funny that can be. I'm deliberately doing that. But let's just say that you have to believe that you're not making horrible mistakes that you can't correct later and call it at that. And again, that's an advantage, not a weakness in science or in politics or in personal deportment. If you can't acknowledge your mistakes and correct them, you're always wrong or a liar. If you correct them, you're only wrong for a short time. Your ego gets in the way of you being effective. Get rid of it. Science has tried to do this for many years. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And I'd like to point out most of those mythological shit that you see where people making contrarian statements are based on them never acknowledging one mistake. Take that to heart. The axioms aren't always right. And assuming that they have to be is also a failed axiom. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.